This 1858 plantation portrait looks peaceful, until experts discovered what the enslaved girl was hiding in her hands. The photograph arrived at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture on a cold morning in February 2024, part of an estate donation from a family in Connecticut. Dr. Jennifer Williams, a curator specializing in antebellum photography, carefully removed the daguerreotype from its protective case. The image showed a white family posed on the veranda of what appeared to be a substantial plantation house. A man and woman seated in ornate chairs, 3 children arranged around them, all dressed in their finest clothing. The year 1858 was inscribed on the brass plate beneath the image. Behind the family, standing in careful formation, were 6 enslaved people. This wasn't unusual. Many plantation owners had included enslaved workers in formal portraits as displays of wealth and property. What caught Jennifer's attention was the clarity of the image. Daguerreotypes from this period were often sharp, capturing details that later photographic processes would miss. She placed the portrait under high-resolution scanning equipment, a process the museum used to preserve and study historical photographs. As the digital image appeared on her screen, Jennifer began her standard examination, noting clothing styles, architectural details, anything that might help date and contextualize the image more precisely. Then she zoomed in on the faces of the enslaved people in the background. 3 women, 2 men, and a girl who couldn't have been more than 16. They all maintained the carefully neutral expressions typical of such photographs, submission performed for the camera, dignity held tight beneath compliance. But the girl's hands drew Jennifer's eye. Her arms hung at her sides, fingers loosely clasped together at her waist. Something about the position seemed deliberate, controlled. Jennifer increased the magnification, focusing on the girl's hands. Her breath stopped. Between the girl's fingers, barely visible in the folds of her worn dress, was something small and pale. At this resolution, Jennifer could see it was fabric, a tiny piece of cloth, perhaps 2 inches square, clutched secretly in the girl's palm. Jennifer had examined hundreds of plantation photographs. She'd never seen anything like this. Enslaved people in these portraits were posed by the photographers, positioned to demonstrate subservience and order. They weren't supposed to hold anything, weren't supposed to have possessions of their own. Every detail was controlled by the enslavers. Yet this girl had managed to conceal something in her hands during the exposure, holding it through the long minutes required for a daguerreotype, keeping it hidden from the photographer and the family who owned her. Jennifer leaned closer to her screen, her heart racing. The fabric appeared to have markings on it, lines, possibly symbols. The resolution was good, but not good enough to make out details at this scale. She needed better equipment, specialized analysis. More importantly, she needed to know who this girl was, what she was holding, and why she'd risked hiding it in a photograph that would document her defiance forever. Jennifer contacted Dr. Marcus Chen, a forensic imaging specialist at MIT who had developed advanced enhancement techniques for historical photographs. Within 2 days, Marcus arrived at the museum with portable equipment that could analyze the daguerreotype at microscopic levels. Daguerreotypes are amazing for this kind of work, Marcus explained as he set up his apparatus. They're not photographs in the modern sense. They're images formed on silver-coated copper plates. The level of detail they can capture is extraordinary, often better than what the human eye could see at the time. He positioned the daguerreotype under a specialized microscope connected to computer imaging software. If there's anything written or drawn on that fabric, we should be able to see it. Jennifer watched the monitor as Marcus worked, adjusting light angles and digital filters. The girl's hands appeared on screen, magnified dozens of times beyond their actual size. The piece of fabric became clearer, definitely cloth, possibly cotton or linen, folded multiple times to reduce its size. "Oh, there," Marcus said, pointing to the screen. "Do you see those marks?" Jennifer leaned in. On the visible surface of the fabric were thin, dark lines, deliberately drawn. As Marcus adjusted the contrast and sharpness, the lines resolved into shapes. Not random marks, but intentional drawings. "It's a map," Jennifer whispered. Marcus nodded slowly, his fingers moving across the keyboard to enhance different sections of the image. "Not just any map. Look at these symbols." He pointed to small marks along the drawn lines. "Stars. And these could be rivers or roads." Jennifer felt her skin prickle. She'd studied underground railroad history extensively. The maps used by freedom seekers were often coded, using natural landmarks and symbols that would mean nothing to enslavers, but everything to those seeking escape routes north. "Can you make out any text?" she asked. Marcus zoomed in further, working with different wavelengths of light to bring out details invisible to normal vision. Faint letters appeared along one edge of the fabric, so small they were barely legible even at this magnification. "MISS," Marcus read slowly. "Mississippi. This is a map of escape routes from Mississippi." Jennifer's mind raced. The plantation house in the photograph had architectural features consistent with the Deep South. If this was Mississippi in 1858, the girl was holding evidence of one of the most dangerous activities imaginable, not just planning escape, but possessing information that could help others escape. "Can you pull up the full image again?" Jennifer asked. "I want to see her face." Marcus switched views, showing the complete daguerreotype. Jennifer studied the girl's expression, neutral, obedient, seemingly unremarkable. But now, knowing what she held in her hands, Jennifer saw something else in those eyes. Not submission, calculation. The girl had known exactly what she was doing, had chosen this moment to preserve evidence of resistance. "How long would the exposure have taken?" Jennifer asked. "For a daguerreotype this sharp in outdoor light? Probably 3 to 5 minutes. She would have had to hold perfectly still the entire time, keeping that map hidden while the image was captured. Or 3 to 5 minutes of absolute stillness, maintaining the performance of compliance while clutching evidence that could get her killed. The courage required was staggering. Jennifer spent the next week immersed in archives, searching for any information about the daguerreotype's origin. The Connecticut family who donated it had inherited the portrait from an ancestor who had married into a Southern family in the 1870s after the Civil War. Their documentation was sparse, but it included a handwritten note stating the image showed the Thornhill Place, Natchez District, Mississippi, 1858. Armed with that name, Jennifer dove into Mississippi plantation records. The Thornhill family had owned a cotton plantation called Fairview, located about 15 miles northeast of Natchez, one of the wealthiest plantation districts in the antebellum South. Property records showed the plantation encompassed over 2,000 acres, and according to the 1860 census, the closest to the photograph's date, enslaved 87 people. Jennifer found the family in the photograph: Robert Thornhill, age 42, his wife Margaret, age 38, and their children, Robert Jr., 16, Elizabeth and 14, and young William, 8. Robert Thornhill had been a prosperous cotton merchant as well as a planter, with business connections throughout the South and in New Orleans. But finding information about the enslaved people in the photograph proved far more difficult. Slave schedules from the 1860 census listed enslaved people by age, gender, and color only. No names, no identities. The Thornhill plantation's schedule showed several teenage girls who could have been the one in the photograph. Jennifer reached out to Dr. Angela Moore, a historian at Jackson State University who specialized in Mississippi slavery and had compiled extensive databases of enslaved people's lives pieced together from fragmentary sources: sale records, plantation journals, church records, and post-emancipation testimonies. They met via video call, Jennifer sharing the enhanced images of the daguerreotype. Angela studied the girl's face carefully, then examined the background details. "Fairview Plantation?" Angela said thoughtfully. "I know it. The Thornhills were considered progressive by the standards of slaveholders, which meant they were shrewd rather than merely brutal. Robert Thornhill kept detailed journals. They're preserved at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. He documented plantation operations, including some information about the people he enslaved." "Could we identify her from those journals?" Jennifer asked. "Possibly. The journals include records of births, deaths, sales, and sometimes skills or assignments. If she was in the household or had a specific role, she might be mentioned." Angela paused. "But Jennifer, if that's really a map she's holding, if she was involved in helping people escape, she would have been extraordinarily careful. She wouldn't have left obvious traces." "I need to go to Jackson," Jennifer said. "I need to see those journals." 3 days later, Jennifer sat in the reading room of the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, white cotton gloves on her hands, carefully turning pages of Robert Thornhill's plantation journals. The entries were methodical and cold, reducing human lives to economic calculations, production numbers, purchases, sales, medical expenses. She found entries from 1858, scanning for any mention of teenage girls. Then, in an entry from April 1858, she found something. Sarah, age approx. 16, light work only due to weak constitution. Margaret finds her useful for fine sewing. Marcus's hands trembled as he continued examining the enhanced image. Days of analysis had revealed more details on the tiny map. Routes marked with precision, symbols indicating safe houses, river crossings carefully noted. This wasn't a hastily drawn sketch. It represented knowledge compiled over time, information gathered from multiple sources. Jennifer returned from Mississippi with copies of Robert Thornhill's journals, her mind spinning with what she discovered. Sarah, the girl in the photograph, had been mentioned multiple times in the months leading up to and following the daguerreotype's creation. The references painted a picture of someone seemingly innocuous, a teenage girl with a delicate constitution, kept in the house for sewing work, valued by Margaret Thornhill for her skill with needlework. But there were other entries that troubled Jennifer. In August 1858, just 3 months after the photograph was taken, Thornhill had written, "2 slaves missing from quarter. Daniel and Ruth. Overseer suspects they fled north. Increased vigilance required." And in September, "No word of runaways. $50 reward posted, but no information received. Suspect aid from outside. Will question house servants. Oh! Jennifer sat with Angela in a coffee shop near the archives, spreading out copies of the journal entries and the enhanced images of Sarah's map. 2 people escaped in August 1858, Jennifer said. 3 months after this photograph was taken, and Thornhill suspected inside help. Angela studied the timeline carefully. If Sarah was involved, if she'd helped them escape, she would have been at tremendous risk once Thornhill started investigating. Oh, look at this. Jennifer pointed to another journal entry from October 1858. Overseer reports unusual activities among house servants. Margaret Seamstress has been seen in conversation with field hands, despite instructions to remain separate. We'll observe more closely. He was watching her, Angela said quietly. He suspected something. The next entry, from 2 weeks later, confirmed it. Margaret noticed her seamstress carries a small book, claims it contains sewing patterns. The girl is clever, perhaps too clever, have instructed Overseer to watch her movements. Jennifer felt her chest tighten. Sarah had been carrying something, a book, a record of some kind. Was it connected to the map? Had she been documenting routes, recording information about safe houses and contacts? There's more, Jennifer said, turning to November 1858. Received information from informant regarding seamstress Sarah. Evidence suggests she may have provided aid to runaways. Planned to question her thoroughly, but the girl disappeared overnight. Suspect she was warned. Am investigating who among the house servants alerted her? Angela leaned back, processing the information. Sarah disappeared. She escaped before Thornhill could act on his suspicions. Or she was sold away, Jennifer countered. Or worse, we don't know what happened to her. But we know she was suspected of helping Daniel and Ruth escape, Angela said, pointing to the names in the journal. And we know she possessed this map, this detailed information about escape routes. She wasn't just a passive witness. She was actively involved in resistance. Jennifer looked again at the daguerreotype, at Sarah's carefully neutral expression, at the map clutched secretly in her hands. The photograph had been taken in May 1858. Daniel and Ruth had escaped in August, just 3 months later. Had Sarah given them this map? Had she provided the information that made their escape possible? We need to find out what happened to Daniel and Ruth, Jennifer said. If they made it north, if they survived, there might be records. Freedmen's Bureau documents, church records, testimony from formerly enslaved people. And we need to find out what happened to Sarah, Angela added. Whether she escaped or was punished, whether she survived or not, her story deserves to be told completely. Jennifer and Angela expanded their search, reaching out to Dr. Raymond Foster, a historian at the University of Southern Mississippi who'd spent decades researching the Underground Railroad's operations in the Deep South. Many people assumed the Underground Railroad only operated in border states, but Raymond's work had documented extensive networks even in the heart of plantation country. Mississippi was one of the most dangerous places to attempt escape, Raymond explained during their phone call. You were hundreds of miles from free territory, traveling through some of the most heavily patrolled areas in the South, but people still tried, and some succeeded with help from organized networks. Could a 16-year-old enslaved girl have been part of that network? Jennifer asked. Absolutely. Some of the most effective operatives were young people who white enslavers underestimated. House servants especially had access to information. They heard conversations, saw correspondence, learned about patrol patterns. A clever teenager could gather intelligence while appearing completely submissive. Raymond agreed to travel to Jackson to examine the evidence. When he saw the enhanced images of the map, his expression grew somber and excited at once. This is extraordinary, he said, studying the markings. These symbols, the stars, represent safe houses or points where help could be found. The lines following rivers make sense. Escapees traveled by water when possible to avoid dogs. And look here, he pointed to a small marking. This could be Natchez under the Hill, the riverfront district. That area had a mixed population, including free black people who sometimes helped freedom seekers. The map shows routes going north and west, Jennifer observed. Right, not everyone headed straight north. Some went west toward Texas, where they could potentially reach Mexico. Others aimed for Indian Territory, what's now Oklahoma, where some tribes offered refuge. The routes were more complex than simple north to freedom. Raymond pulled out his own research materials, maps he'd compiled of known safe houses and routes in Mississippi. If we can identify specific landmarks on Sarah's map, we might be able to trace the actual routes she was documenting. They spent hours comparing the tiny map to historical geography, identifying rivers, roads, and possible safe locations. The map appeared to show routes from the Natchez area heading northeast toward Tennessee and northwest toward the Mississippi River's major crossing points. This level of detail, Raymond said, suggests Sarah didn't create this alone. This is information compiled from multiple sources, probably over time. She was part of a network, and this map was valuable enough that she risked preserving it. Jennifer thought about the two enslaved people who'd escaped from Fairview in August 1858, Daniel and Ruth. Could this map have helped specific people escape? Almost certainly. Maps like this wouldn't be drawn and hidden for abstract purposes. They were practical tools, meant to be used. Raymond looked at the daguerreotype again, at Sarah's carefully neutral expression. She was probably a courier, someone who passed information between people planning escape. The question is, what happened after those two people fled and Thornhill started investigating? Jennifer felt a chill. Robert Thornhill's journal entry had mentioned questioning house servants. Sarah, clever with her hands, working in the house where she could overhear everything, would have been an obvious target for suspicion. "We need to find out what happened to her," Jennifer said. Angela focused her research on tracing what happened to Sarah after November 1858, when she disappeared from Fairview Plantation. The challenge was enormous. Enslaved people who escaped often changed their names, moved far from their places of origin, and deliberately obscured their pasts to avoid recapture. She started with Friedman's bureau records from the late 1860s, searching for any Sarah with connections to Natchez or the Fairview area. The bureau had registered thousands of formerly enslaved people after the Civil War, helping them legalize marriages, locate family members, and secure employment. After days of searching, Angela found something promising. A marriage record from 1866, registered in Natchez. A woman named Sarah had married a man named Daniel. The record noted that both bride and groom were formerly enslaved, and that Daniel had served with the Union Army during the war. Daniel, the same name as one of the people who'd escaped from Fairview in August 1858. Angela immediately called Jennifer. "I think I found her. A Sarah married a Daniel in Natchez in 1866. The record includes an interesting note. Bride and groom reunited after long separation, having fled bondage separately and found each other in freedom." Jennifer felt her heart race. They were separated when they escaped, but they found each other again after the war. "It fits the timeline," Angela said. "If Sarah helped Daniel escape in August 1858, then had to flee herself in November when Thornhill began investigating, they would have been separated for 8 years, until emancipation made it safe for them to return to Mississippi and search for each other." Jennifer pulled up the enhanced image of the daguerreotype again, studying Sarah's face with new understanding. She'd been 16 years old in this photograph, holding evidence of her resistance, perhaps already planning to help Daniel and Ruth escape. Within months, she'd have to flee herself, leaving behind everything she knew. Raymond joined their investigation, searching northern records for evidence of Sarah's journey. He found a letter in the archives of an Ohio Quaker meeting, dated 1859, describing assistance provided to freedom seekers. The letter mentioned, "A young woman of perhaps 17 years who gave her name as S. arrived in desperate condition, having traveled through Kentucky. She possessed valuable knowledge of routes and had aided others in escape, making her flight necessary when discovery seemed imminent." The description fit. Sarah would have been 17 in 1859. The reference to valuable knowledge of routes matched what they knew about the map, and the mention of discovery being imminent aligned with Thornhill's journal entries about investigating her. "She made it to Ohio," Jennifer said. "But how did she get from Mississippi to Ohio? That's hundreds of miles through slave territory." "The same routes she'd been documenting," Raymond suggested. "She would have known the safe houses, the contacts, the river crossings, the map she preserved. She used it herself." Angela found additional traces. A mention in a Detroit church record from 1860 of a young woman named Sarah who worked as a seamstress. Her skill with needlework, documented in Thornhill's journals, would have traveled with her. A notation in a Canadian census from 1861 listing a black woman, age approximately 19, living in a community of formerly enslaved people near Toronto. She went all the way to Canada, Jennifer realized. After the Fugitive Slave Act, it was the only place truly safe from recapture. But if Sarah had reached Canada by 1861, how had she ended up back in Mississippi to marry Daniel in 1866? Angela found the answer in Friedman's Bureau transport logs. A Sarah traveling from Detroit to Mississippi in 1865, marked as seeking family. "She came back after emancipation," Angela said softly. "She spent years in Canada, safe but separated from everyone she knew, and as soon as the war ended, she came back looking for the people she'd left behind." "Looking for Daniel," Jennifer added. Jennifer knew they needed more than circumstantial evidence to confirm that the Sarah in the 1866 marriage record was the same Sarah from the daguerreotype. They needed descendants, family stories, something that could definitively connect the brave 16-year-old who'd hidden a map in her hands to the woman who'd married Daniel after the war. Angela began tracing the family line through census records and church documents. Sarah and Daniel had stayed in Natchez after their marriage, having 4 children between 1867 and 1874. Daniel worked as a carpenter and Sarah as a dressmaker. her needlework skills serving her well in freedom as they had in bondage. Both had been active in their church and in building schools for black children during Reconstruction. The trail led to Grace Patterson, age 73, living in Jackson. She was Sarah and Daniel's great-great-granddaughter. When Jennifer called and explained her research, Grace's response was immediate. "You need to come see the quilt." 3 days later, Jennifer, Angela, and Raymond sat in Grace's living room, surrounded by family photographs spanning 5 generations. Grace brought out a carefully preserved quilt, folded in acid-free tissue paper. "This was made by my great-great-grandmother Sarah," Grace explained. "It's been passed down through the women in our family for over 150 years. My grandmother told me it was special, that it held secrets." The quilt was beautiful, made from scraps of different fabrics, stitched together in an intricate pattern. But as Grace unfolded it completely, Jennifer gasped. Embroidered in one corner, in tiny, precise stitches, was a map. The same map Sarah had held hidden in her hands in the 1858 daguerreotype. "She recreated it," Jennifer breathed. "After she escaped, after the war, she embroidered the map into this quilt to preserve it." "My grandmother said it was a freedom map," Grace said quietly. "She said our ancestor helped people escape slavery, that she carried information that saved lives, and that she wanted us to remember. She said Sarah told her daughters that the map represented the bravest thing she ever did, not escaping herself, but helping others find their way first." Raymond examined the quilt carefully, comparing it to their photographs of the tiny map in the daguerreotype. "It's identical. Every root, every symbol, every marking. She preserved this deliberately." Angela pointed to additional embroidery along the border of the quilt, names stitched in that same tiny, precise hand. Daniel, Ruth, James, Elizabeth, Samuel. These must be the names of people the map helped save. Grace nodded. Grandmother said Sarah told the story of helping 12 people escape before she had to run herself. These are their names, the ones she knew about, anyway. Some she only knew by first name, or by no name at all, just faces in the dark, asking for direction. "Ruth," Jennifer noted. "That was Daniel's sister. She escaped the same night he did, in August 1858. "Sarah helped them both," Grace confirmed. According to the family story, Sarah and Daniel had been planning to marry, as much as enslaved people could plan anything. But when Daniel and Ruth's escape was discovered, Sarah knew she'd be suspected. She stayed quiet for 3 months, trying to deflect suspicion, but eventually had to flee too. "They were separated for 8 years, Angela said softly. 8 years, Grace confirmed. Sarah made it to Canada. Daniel joined the Union Army and fought in the war. After emancipation, Sarah came back looking for him, not even knowing if he'd survived." Grace opened a small wooden box, revealing a piece of yellowed cloth, folded many times. "This is the original," she said reverently. "The actual map Sarah held in that photograph." Jennifer's hands trembled as Grace carefully unfolded the fabric. It was fragile, the markings faded but still visible. The same map from the daguerreotype, the same map embroidered on the quilt. The actual artifact, preserved for over 160 years. "How did she keep it?" Raymond asked. "If she escaped through hundreds of miles of dangerous territory, how did she protect something so small and so incriminating?" "Grandmother said Sarah hid it in her hair," Grace explained. "She wore her hair wrapped, like many enslaved women did, and she kept the map folded tiny and tucked into the wrapping. She carried it all the way to Canada and kept it her whole life." Jennifer studied the tiny map under magnification, seeing details that hadn't been visible even in the enhanced daguerreotype images. There were additional markings on the reverse side. More routes, more safe houses, information compiled over years. "This wasn't created quickly," she observed. "Sarah must have been gathering this information for a long time, probably from multiple sources." Grace pulled out another family treasure, a small notebook, its pages filled with what appeared to be sewing patterns and measurements. "Sarah kept this too. Look closely at the notations." Jennifer examined the pages. Among the legitimate sewing notes were coded entries. 12 miles to the crossing, wait for the quarter moon, follow the owl's call. Instructions for escape, disguised as seamstress records. "She was documenting everything," Angela said with awe. Under the guise of her work, she was creating a manual for freedom. Raymond photographed each page carefully. "This is extraordinary historical evidence. It shows sophisticated intelligence gathering and information management under conditions of extreme surveillance." Grace shared more family stories. Sarah and Daniel had lived together for 42 years after their marriage, until Daniel's death in 1908. Sarah lived until 1915, reaching the age of 73. She'd raised her children, worked as a respected dressmaker, and remained active in her church and community. She never spoke publicly about her role in the Underground Railroad. Grace said, "It was too dangerous, even after slavery ended. There were people who would have harmed her for what she'd done, But she told her daughters, and they told their daughters, and the story has been passed down. She wanted it remembered, Jennifer said. That's why she preserved the map, why she embroidered it on the quilt, why she kept the notebook. She wanted future generations to know. Grace nodded, tears in her eyes. She wanted us to know that we come from people who fought back, who resisted, who helped each other. That even in the worst circumstances, our ancestors found ways to claim their humanity and fight for freedom. Jennifer looked at the collection of artifacts spread across Grace's table. The daguerreotype, the quilt, the original map, the coded notebook. Together, they told a story of remarkable courage and resistance. We need to tell the story, Jennifer said. With your permission, we need to share Sarah's courage with the world. Grace smiled through her tears. That's exactly what she would have wanted. She preserved all this evidence so that someday someone would understand what she did. You're fulfilling her hope. The Smithsonian prepared a comprehensive exhibition centered on Sarah's story, but Jennifer insisted it needed to be more than just one person's tale. Sarah had been part of a network, and that collective resistance deserved recognition. Angela traced the other names embroidered on Sarah's quilt. Ruth, Daniel's sister, had made it to Canada with him and eventually married there, raising 6 children in freedom. Samuel had settled in Toronto, where his descendants still lived. Elizabeth had reached Ohio and later testified about her escape, her words published in abolitionist newspapers. Each person Sarah had helped represented not just one life saved, but entire families eventually lived in freedom. Raymond calculated that the 12 people Sarah directly assisted had produced hundreds of descendants over the generations, all owing their existence in part to a 16-year-old girl's courage. The exhibition opened in June 2024 to overwhelming response. The daguerreotype was displayed with the enhanced images showing the map in Sarah's hands. Beside it was the original map, preserved in climate-controlled glass, and the quilt with its embroidered recreation. Sarah's coded notebook was there too, its pages revealing the intelligence work she'd conducted under the guise of seamstress duties. But Jennifer had insisted on including another element, a wall honoring the people who'd made Sarah's resistance possible. There was information about the network members who'd compiled the routes she documented, about the free black people and white abolitionists who'd operated safe houses, about the people like Sarah who'd gathered and passed information at tremendous personal risk. One name stood out, Martha, a woman who'd worked in the Fairview kitchen. Grace had shared a family story about Martha, warning Sarah that Thornhill planned to question her, giving Sarah time to escape. Martha had been sold away 3 months later, separated from her own children as punishment for her suspected role in helping Sarah flee. We don't know what happened to Martha after that, Angela had said during the exhibition's preparation. She disappears from records, but her sacrifice made Sarah's survival possible. Jennifer had pushed to include Martha's story, and they'd succeeded in tracing her through fragmentary records. Martha had survived, had searched for her children after emancipation, and, miraculously, had found them in 1869, reuniting after a decade of forced separation. She got them back, Grace had said when they discovered this. After what she sacrificed for Sarah, she got her own family back. The exhibition drew thousands of visitors in its first months. School groups came, descendants of formerly enslaved people came, historians came. People stood before the daguerreotype, looking at Sarah's carefully neutral expression, understanding now what defiance and courage looked like under oppression. Media coverage was extensive. The story resonated because it challenged simplified narratives about slavery and resistance. Sarah hadn't been rescued by outside abolitionists. She'd been an active agent in her own liberation and the liberation of others. The sophisticated intelligence network she'd been part of demonstrated organizational capacity and strategic thinking that white enslavers had never imagined their bondspeople possessed. Grace attended the opening with 24 family members, representing 4 generations of Sarah's descendants. They stood together before the display, honoring an ancestor whose courage had made their existence possible. This is what she wanted, Grace said during a panel discussion at the museum. Not glory for herself, but recognition that enslaved people fought back, that we resisted, that we were never just passive victims waiting to be saved. 6 months after the exhibition opened, its impact continued to spread. Jennifer received emails from across the country, people whose family stories mentioned similar acts of resistance, artifacts that might contain hidden evidence, questions about ancestors who'd disappeared from plantation records. A woman from Georgia contacted the museum, saying her great-great-grandmother had been a seamstress, and family stories suggested she'd encoded information in her needlework. Could the researchers help investigate? A man from Alabama had a quilt his family believed contained a map, though they'd never been able to confirm it. Could the Smithsonian's imaging technology reveal what might be hidden? Each inquiry represented another potential thread in the vast network of resistance that had operated throughout the enslaved South. Jennifer, Angela, and Raymond found themselves coordinating a grassroots historical investigation, working with descendants and local historians to uncover evidence that had been hiding in plain sight for over a century and a half. The museum created an online database where people could submit family stories and artifacts. Within months, over 300 submissions had been received. Not all would be verifiable, but many were. Together, they painted a picture of organized, sophisticated resistance far more extensive than previously documented. Raymond published a comprehensive study analyzing Sarah's network and its implications. This wasn't isolated heroism, he wrote. It was systematic, organized resistance requiring intelligence gathering, secure communication, strategic planning, and risk management. Enslaved people created parallel information systems that operated within and against the surveillance designed to prevent exactly such organization. The study sparked debates about how slavery's history should be taught, not just as a system of oppression, but as a system constantly challenged by those trapped within it. For Grace and Sarah's other descendants, the impact was deeply personal. A family reunion was held, bringing together descendants of Sarah, Daniel, Ruth, and several of the other people Sarah had helped escape. Over 70 people attended, representing 12 families whose ancestors had been connected by courage and resistance. Grace commissioned a new quilt, incorporating fabric pieces donated by each descendant family. The center featured a reproduction of Sarah's map, embroidered in tiny stitches like the original. "This is for the next generation," Grace explained at its unveiling. "So they know where they come from, so they understand their existence is the result of impossible courage." Jennifer completed a book documenting the full story. Hidden in her hands, Sarah's map and the Underground Railroad in the Deep South. It became required reading in many schools, changing how students learned about slavery and resistance. 5 years after the daguerreotype first arrived at the museum, Jennifer stood in the expanded permanent exhibition. Sarah's portrait still held the place of honor, the seemingly powerless girl who'd actually been clutching evidence of organized resistance and extraordinary agency. Grace brought her newest great-grandchild, another Sarah, to see the exhibition. She held the baby before the daguerreotype and whispering, "This is where you come from people who were told they were nothing but refused to believe it." Jennifer watched from across the gallery, thinking about that moment in 1858 when 16-year-old Sarah had stood for that portrait. She'd hidden her map, not just to protect it, but to preserve it, to ensure that someday someone would see what she'd done. That hope had been fulfilled. Sarah's courage was now known, celebrated, studied. Her map had led people to freedom then, and inspired understanding now. The photograph that seemed peaceful at first glance had become evidence of resistance that no system of oppression could fully suppress. The girl in the 1858 photograph had won, not just by surviving, but by making sure her resistance would outlive slavery itself, reaching across generations to tell a truth that needed telling. Even in the darkest moments, people resist. They help each other. They fight for freedom. And sometimes they hide evidence of that fight in places no one thinks to look, in hands that appear empty but actually hold the world.